Hello? 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 GB, how are you, brother?
Hey, I will be available in literally 3 minutes if you just give me that much time.
Take your time, no rush.
All right. Hey, um, I've never seen jujitsu. It's nice to meet you.
It's actually another profile of mine, so I'm recording this if you don't mind. And if you do mind, I could actually stop, but it just helps so I can walk around on my phone and talk. But yeah, actually, that's a good point. I should ask. Would you mind if I recorded this or not?
No, I don't mind. Is it like for like a YouTube video or something?
Yeah. That's generally what I've done. I've done more formal debates, like on the Crucible, which is an Eastern Orthodox debate channel. But what I've wanted to start doing is just capturing conversations, more informal debates. Because what I've found is typically it's the dregs of internet Christianity who tend to engage in more formal debates, except for the ultra legitimate ones, right? I want to capture more conversational engagements, particularly with people acting in good faith. So yeah, to your point or to your question, it is for YouTube.
No, I appreciate you asking. It would be an honor. Some rando on your YouTube.
So okay, so I guess it would be important for both of us if we kind of both gave a little bit of rundown of what we believe. I assume you're either Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, but that's an assumption.
How do you know? Wait, really? How did you know? Was it the profile picture or was it just like...
Yeah, the profile picture.
Sick. Nice. Yeah, I am. And you are not.
Yes, I am. Are you Eastern Orthodox or are you Catholic?
Oh, I'm Catholic. Sorry.
There's no word. I was actually born and raised Catholic. I have my grandmother was from Ecuador, so I have a lot of respect for that tradition. Actually, as of up until the pandemic, for about 9 years, I went to frequented a Cistercian monastery here in the state that I live in about twice a year. Would visit a couple more times, but it's about 45 minutes from where I'm at, so it's really convenient. But so are you Novus Ordo or are you Tradcat?
Definitely Novus Ordo. I'm all for it. By the way, I wanted to let you know that you will definitely have an advantage. So you grew up Catholic, but I haven't even been confirmed yet. So you will definitely. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know. Also, hey, what's up, Insanity? Good to see you, man.
What's up, Insanity? How are you, brother?
I'm doing well, thank you for asking. How are you?
Good, good. It seems both me and GB know you, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, GB. So back to your point. I grew up Catholic. I have a more experiential familiarity, but I would turn Protestant around the age of 12, and I wasn't even confirmed. I went through baptism, and but I never even did my first confirmation. So yeah, no. As far as theology, it's actually the most difficult to pin down because of the I forgot what the terminology the Catholic Church uses, but it's desire to be as broad as it can be.
Wow.
I don't want to call it ecumenism, but something to that effect, where the Catholicism of Africa and South America, though different, share a commonality, and so that's why it's the most difficult to kind of pin down them. But yeah.
Okay, I agree. That's really cool that you mentioned that because I have known about it. And honestly, dude, it's been breath of fresh air. Being able to, with a clear conscience, say, yeah, Catholicism, I believe is the truth. And yet, despite that, like I don't know, I've never thought I would ever hold as wide of I never thought that the gates of heaven would be this wide. That's
Hey, so though we come from different perspectives, I actually have a lot of respect for that sentiment. I believe the road is narrow, and the I forgot the other part of that scriptural reference, but I think the path is hard and the way is narrow. But that once you get there, the gate theology or the particulars shouldn't be the thing that keep you out. But so let me ask you this: were you Protestant before becoming Catholic?
yes.
What tradition do you come from as far as background or?
Okay, so you can fairly call me out if it doesn't fit. I have been told that if you're not Lutheran or whatever, you're technically not Protestant. So, but I grew up like non-denominational. Went to Calvary chapels a lot. So, and also had I flirted a little bit with like the Pentecostal and the Baptist stuff. Especially Baptist. But yeah, so it's somewhere around that area of Christendom.
That's awesome. So so my transition from Catholicism into Protestantism began with Calvary Chapel of Anaheim. What Calvary Chapel do you frequent?
So I was going to the one in Hemet. No, actually, no, Southern California. Nothing high profile like that. Like Anaheim. Wow, that's so cool that you actually grew up in there. And at 12 years old, is that what you are talking about? Like when you Calvary? Okay.
Yeah. So it was a long transition in and out of church for a couple of decades. Or it was a young faith and a mature faith, but faith nonetheless. And it began with Calvary Chapel, which I tend to view as a very centric Protestant denomination, very well balanced between charismatic or charism and the more legalistic aspects. But eventually, through my maturation at about 25, 26, I landed in a Reformed Baptist camp and stayed there for about the next 5, 6 years before finally leaving the Protestant tradition. So yeah, that's very cool.
That is really, really cool. I'm actually really glad that we have that kind of background. Okay, nice.
Yeah, so here, let me tell you a little bit about my my Gnostic beliefs. So at 30, I had this crisis of faith, and it wasn't just faith, but it was definitely an integral aspect of it. I found myself in a great career, making great money, using my degree. I was plugged into a great church in a city that I wanted to stay in, and I got to this point where I'm like, 5 years prior, few years prior, I would have desired to be here. Now that I'm here, I in essence feel no different than I did before. And it bothered me such to where I quit my job, left the field that I was in at the time. I was a finance guy. Moved to Texas, so I left the city and left the Protestant faith. And I would have told you, I would have suspected that my behavior would have reverted back to the way it was more in college, where a little bit of devaluing of women and just selfishness. I thought that that's kind of what I'd revert back to in, given enough time. And what I found is that though I cared less about cussing and I wasn't as modesty driven as I was before, that I still saw the humanity in others, women, other individuals. My heart had changed a little, but I wrestled a lot with the particulars. But one of those particulars, but one of the things that I didn't mind anymore was psychedelics. So I hadn't used psychedelics in probably 7, 8 years. When I came back to the church at about 24, 25. And so when I left, I had an opportunity to, and I remember nothing but the best memories of it from college. And so I said, yeah, for sure. Did a few more times. And had an experience where the best way to describe it is that the information I had been gathering for years sort of imploded on itself. So I came across this concept, this notion, and I thought to myself, in the middle of a psychedelic trip, I thought to myself, what if God was so infinite? So I took God to the extreme in size, or in qualitatively, quantitatively. What if God was truly singular in every possible dimension or mode of being? And then I beat to this thought of what if God was so big that there existed no such thing as an outside of it? What would that mean? And immediately I came up with, I realized this concept of infinity, a true infinity, that which is truly limitless in every way, has every finite attribute because it couldn't even lack that paradoxically. Excuse me. And it led me to this realization that, well, if that were true, then that would mean that everything that exists is it. Whether it seems like it or not is a different thing. So kind of the difference between a phenomenological perspective on it. Things we appear different, things appear lesser and greater, things appear separate, but that what if what I just came across or thought of realized were true, then that would mean the ontological reality undergirding it would not be separation, greater, lesser, otherness, but it would all be this thing. And so through some time, the reason why I use the phrase my knowledge imploded onto itself is this concept of infinity really uniquely so answered questions that I had been struggling with my entire life, philosophical, theological questions, experiential questions. And so through time, I have come to the conclusion that I am a Gnostic, and I adhere to a form of Gnosticism, granted that I've developed myself, but I refer to it as Reformed Thomasean Gnosticism. And there's reasons why, but to kind of give a brief definition of what Gnosticism is, it is the belief that there is something to know and that the knowledge of which changes everything. And I believe that that concept is infinity, or that notion is infinity. And I believe what that practically means in the bluntest, lamest terms, or layman's terms I could use, would be that essentially we are all God dreaming that we're not. What that doesn't mean is that we're all gods dreaming that we're not, but rather that we are all the same singular being experiencing different persona. Persona comes from the Greek word prospon. Prospon was the masks that actors would use in the amphitheater. So prospon to persona to person, essentially the etymological root of person or personhood is this notion of a mask. And so, yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what I believe. That's kind of how I came to believe it. And,
Okay, can you hear me?
I got cut off there real quick. Yeah, I'm sorry, I got cut off there for a second. Go ahead.
No, I got cut. I mean, I couldn't hear you anymore.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. You can hear me, right?
Yeah. So I don't know what the last thing you heard was, but that essentially I was saying that in a nutshell kind of sums up what I believe and how I kind of came to believe it.
So, how much of because I've met some, right? But
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Say that again. We got cut off there.
oh yeah. So I've met some.
Oh, you cut off again.
Sorry about that, bro. I don't know why I keep.
No worries.
I guess I don't know what else to say. Besides, because I just don't want to get. But okay, as far as Christianity is concerned, do you believe that the Bible's main message is what you this idea of Gnosticism?
In many ways, the majority of ways, absolutely. In the particulars, no. Such as, and I'll give you a perfect example. I think most Christians, many Catholics, but definitely the overwhelming majority of Protestants would believe that without and Eastern Orthodox as well, without a explicit profession of faith in Jesus, whether that be an internal heart profession or a very public open profession, that the salvific work, or I'm sorry, the salvific fulcrum, the thing that takes you from unsaved to saved, if we could use that terminology, would be a profession of faith in Christ, a submission in your heart to the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Now, so here's where I have difficulty. By and large, 95% of what Scripture says, I would adhere to as true in its heart, or at the essence of in the essence of what it's saying. However, when it comes to particulars, such as the necessity for profession or belief in Jesus Christ and the work on the cross, I find that to be something that I not only don't believe, but I also find that Scripture has a hard time reconciling itself with that sentiment. Primarily, I think the best case could be made in referencing what the question that was posed to Jesus about what is the most important commandment in the Tanakh, which he said was two, actually, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as himself. Obviously, it was a Sadducee, a lawyer, who asked him that question, posed that question. And at the end of that conversation, the Sadducee agreed with him. And the reason why I think that is the best, that is hard to reconcile with what we've determined to be how saving grace is brought into someone's life, is because Christ in that moment very easily could have said the old scripture or the Old Testament points to a coming Messiah, and that it's faith, or that it's works, or that it's the Mashiach, right? Or it's whatever. He could have said anything, but that he referenced something that is that doesn't necessitate that. He said, basically, the question was, "What's the most important thing in the Old Testament?" And his response was something that a Buddhist could.
You're right. So why? Okay, yeah, I hear you actually. Track.
Sure.
So okay, this was one of the first things that we talked about was like how universalist seeming, right? Obviously, they're not universal. The Catholic Church very strongly believes in hell. They teach in hell. They teach that people will spend eternity there. But it is much more universalist than we give it than I'm used to. So why? Yeah, I agree with you. I do see this kind of like broad kind of grace statement throughout the scriptures. So why not Catholicism? Or do you think, knowing what you know now, you would be more open to like going back to it based on like something like that?
Absolutely. So, of the three Christian denominations, Catholicism is the one that, if I were to go back to one, would be that. The difficulty comes in so if you could use a golf ball as an analogy, if you hit a golf ball, if you hit it right on, it's going to go where it's supposed to go. But from the perspective or point of view of the golf ball, from where it starts, should I say, you only need to be a millimeter off, and that millimeter off could end up in throughout its trajectory, shanking it to the left, shaking it to the right, hitting it into the ground, going too high up and not getting enough distance, so that subtle differences at the beginning could play out into significant divergences. And what I mean by that is that I think the three Abrahamic traditions are unique from other world faiths in a very particular way. So let me put it into one category. The every other religion. So and this is a broad stroke right here, but let's say Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Jainism, Sikhism, shamanistic traditions, animistic traditions, even pagan traditions, mystery school type of traditions. But more importantly,
sorry to interrupt. Like, I've just been listening 5 minutes, and I don't know if I'll ever get a grasp of exactly what you two are talking about. So I'm just gonna interrupt, poke my finger in, and say, do you think you two could kind of tell me what started this, or like what you're discussing?
Yeah, so right now we're having a one-on-one conversation debate, which obviously I don't care to bring in other people's perspectives or questions or comments either. But yeah, so we've been kind of going at this, I guess, maybe 10, 20 minutes or so. So yeah, we're a little kind of invested into the conversation and kind of the pretext that's led up to where we're at. So any difficulty would kind of be there. It's been a 20-minute conversation and whatnot, but would be happy to answer any specific questions, or I'm sure JD would as well. But
I would do anything for bro. Love that guy, even though he has not accepted my friend request. But no, we are talking about basically it's a debate between Gnosticism and Catholicism, or really a discussion debate. Yeah, I really don't intend on like destroying anybody, and I don't think Kael does either, but I mean maybe he does.
no. And so what his question was essentially, why would I, given what I believe and given how generally commensurate it is with Catholicism, as far as the broadness and the inclusiveness of salvation. It's not Reformed Protestant theology that believes you have to profess X, Y, and Z. It's not very exclusionary, but it's from the Catholics' perspective, I'm sure that they would argue it's as inclusive as they believe Scripture and church tradition would allow. And so his question is, well, given that, why wouldn't I just become Catholic then? Or what would prevent me from converting to Catholicism, which I think is a very good question. And my answer was that, yeah, I'm sure you heard the answer about the golf ball and small divergence at the beginning could result in a substantial divergence at the end of it, right? And so, I'm getting to what that very subtle but significant difference at the beginning is at the root that I think leads me to be hesitant about particularly choosing an Abrahamic faith. So I included those list of world religions, but I want to very importantly also include in that list of world religions Christian Gnosticism, Islamic Sufi faith, and the Jewish Kabbalah, so that you can see that even within the three Abrahamic faiths, they each have a mystical tradition that is also commensurate with that list of world faiths that I gave in the regard that I'm about to explain. And then on the other side of that spectrum, you have the three traditional Abrahamic faiths. The difference between those two categories, as I've just kind of separated them, is this. And I believe that a great definition or understanding of kind of what we're trying to get at with theology proper would be who is God or what is God, who and what is God, who and what is man, and what is the relationship between the two. And I think all those world religions plus those three particular sects within the Abrahamic tradition,
they're all going to give like wildly different answers to the relationship to man is going to be different.
No, I actually think that they will give a very broadly similar answer, and I think that basically that what is similar between Taoism and Hinduism is that they believe that whatever Brahma is, or whatever Tao is, and whatever man is, that even if they seem separate or that we experience them as different, that essentially at the end of the day, ontologically, they are the same or of the same thing.
Oh, I see. I would probably agree with some of that. Like, I think a lot of those traditions have the same like erroneous presuppositions. So I think they would probably, it doesn't really matter what they say halfway up the scale. I mean, if they're starting with the same views of simplicity and the same disparate vastness between man and God, right? God is defined in opposite to the created order. I mean, if they start with that sort of stuff, then probably end up with something quite similar in either case.
So I heard three things there. So I don't know, GB, if you mind me addressing those three things real quick. First thing I heard is so I take it you're not a Thomist then, in regards to absolute divine simplicity?
No.
Okay, perfect. The second thing I heard, the second thing I would say is that, no, I forgot. Let's just go to the third. The third is I think that there's it happens. I think the third thing is I think there might have been a reversal there. I think the three Abrahamic faiths proper, as we know them, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, would say that whatever God is and whatever man is, that they're separate, and that the only way to unify them or reunify them is through Christ, or obviously Judaism and Islam would give a different answer, but that there is a chasm or a separation there ontologically, and that they're not the same thing. But that all the other worldviews would, at the end of the day, the ultimate analysis or final conclusion, would say that whatever Brahma is and whatever man is, that it is the same thing. right? As a matter of fact, let's take Hinduism as a perfect example. Hinduism would say that the non-dualistic tradition would say, "Oh yeah, I remember what that second thing was." But Hinduism, the non-dualistic tradition, like Advaita Vedanta, would say that whatever Brahma is, which is their ultimate reality, their God, and whatever Atman is, which is any derivation or diminution thereof, are two sides of the same coin, and essentially the same, just seen or experienced as different. So that's a perfect example of, even though they're going to word it differently, what they're saying is that whatever God is or whatever man is, ultimately they're one and the same.
I just guess I'm saying like I'll just give an example. So like in the Christian mystery, it is divinity himself, right, who under the figure of a servant drains the cup of human suffering, right, in the end defeating suffering, empties himself of his divine nature, enters into death, and only in the end to tread death underfoot. And we're asked to imitate this victory, right? And this imitation doesn't mean a negation of the created human nature. So I think we touch a kind of difference between the ancient mysteries and the Christian mystery, right? Like the goal proposed for the initiate into the mysteries is one that involves the surrender of the separated human consciousness, right? Is one that involves ecstasis, or the standing out of beyond the consciousness of an individual personal identity, right? It means abandoning, transcending the created human nature and sinking and merging into the undifferentiated unity of the divine principle. And that's very different than Christianity, right? That goal as it's proposed by Platonist or Neo-Platonist, for the Christians, God certainly does transcend the limit of human knowledge, but he's not simply a first cause or a primordial unity or an impersonal mathematical idea.
So I wouldn't disagree with much of what you said, but what I would point to is say that the distinction between God and man is exemplified in that Christ, or the second person of the Godhead, had to take on human nature, that it wasn't something inherent within who he was. So basically two categories. One category, every major world religion, with the exception of the three Abrahamic propers, saying that whatever God is, whatever man is, they're one and the same. And then you have the three proper Abrahamic religions, which would say whatever God is, whatever man is, that they're fundamentally distinct, even if there is a way to bridge that gap and unify or reunify, depending on
I think what I was trying to point out is like perhaps like in that being an initiate into one of these things, the Christian initiate is not asked to abandon his separate personal identity, right? It's not what do they call it, apotheosis, right? Where they kind of merge into the divine nature, they become the God.
Well, so see, let's take apotheosis, for instance. The difference between apotheosis and theosis, which is a Eastern Orthodox doctrine, is simply a matter of how. The what is still exactly the same. So even there's distinctions within the three proper or the three major Christian denominations. Hey, bear with me 1 second, please.
Yeah, sure. 1 second. There we go. That's it. That's all I can bear. That's all I can do. I'm a broken man now.
Okay, so but I remember that second thing I was going to say in terms of your original statement, which is that I hear a knowledge of presuppositional apologetics, and just so we're all aware, I come from the Reformed Baptist tradition, and so in many ways, not only that, I'm very I've tried to study. I've studied for a number of years the Eastern Orthodox faith and presuppositionalism and transcendental
argumentation.
argumentation.
Familiar, like when I mention things like apotheosis as like juxtapositioned against theosis, right? You see
Yes, and just so we're all aware, I am myself am a transcendental presuppositionalist. It's just the way that both a Calvinist and an Eastern Orthodox could utilize that form of argumentation. I likewise have been able to implement that same apologetic approach in the guise of Gnosticism. So, but yeah, so that's generally my point, is that those three proper Abrahamic traditions differ at a fundamental level from every other world religion, basically only in that way. Everything that stems from it, I would say, are various levels of detail, but not to diminish any worldview, but that ultimately the only reason why I wouldn't just say, hey, let's just do Catholicism, is because of that root presupposition of the ontological distinction between man or creature and creation. For instance, that subtle presupposition of the inherent distinction between creator and creation is the only reason why I'm not a Catholic. And if I was a Catholic,
do you think that distinction in Catholicism is too hard a distinction? Like I think perhaps okay.
No, so I don't think it's too hard. So let me put it this way real quick. If I was a Catholic, I would be an Origenist. Who, if you've studied a little bit about Origen,
I know a little bit about Origen.
Yeah. So what was one of his most controversial stances is that you kind of infer from his work that he was ultimately for universal recapitulation, or that he believed in his own estimation that at the end of the day, that's kind of the way that's going to play out. And so I not only
he had a kind of weird view about the fall as well. Have you read Saint Maximus on the Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ?
No, I have not read Saint Maximus, but I'm familiar with Saint Maximus in terms of infinity. So infinity is the ultimate presupposition that I begin with. I just think you'd like it because he takes Origen's system and he kind of turns it on its head in a really kind of interesting way, right? Because Origen's system starts with rest, doesn't it? It starts with rest, and then it kind of goes into movement. There's a kind of falling into being. Maximus kind of turns it on its head so that the final telos of a person is the rest that God has. It's just very interesting. I'd look into it because he's answering a lot of Origenism, I guess. So yes, I would agree on much of what you just said. Let's actually stick with the stasis motion distinction, or the one that you brought earlier, the cause, causer, the uncaused cause, and all of what it caused. Right there, there's this distinction here inherent that stasis, change are mutually exclusive. You see this with the philosophical disagreements between Parmenides and Heraclitus.
Being and becoming, bro. Being and becoming.
Right. But think about this. The statement to say that everything changes is itself a statement that wouldn't change. Right. So that even
I swear, like as a British, that just tickles me a little bit more, man. You know, we love our irony and stuff like that. It's just
but what I'm getting to is anytime you have one, it necessitates the other. Coming back to the two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah, you see this a lot in like debates. People want to appeal to these universals that immediately seem to necessitate some sort of dialectic, right? Like, let's talk about becoming, and it's like becoming from being what, like moving into,
No, but what I'm referencing is the fact that the dialectic is necessary would imply, or at least I would infer, that then therefore that dialectic is actually not dialectic, but it's actually two sides of the same coin. It's not two, but it's one, just perceived as two, like space and time. Take a physics example. Space and time are two sides of the same coin. You remove one, you remove the other. What would that mean? That it's no longer space and time, but rather what we're viewing dialectically is actually space-time, this continuum that our finite minds could only perceive in a dialectical way, because we don't have the perspective to comprehend it, or the capacity to comprehend it in its fullness. So I would say the same thing about stasis and change, that they would seem dialectically opposed, but that dialectic itself would imply to me that we just aren't able to see the fullness of what it is, and that it's actually not two things in opposition, but rather two polar extremes along the same continuum.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting if you know a little bit about Origin. You know, he has this view of like rest, then movement, then becoming. You know, I think Maximus's scheme might you might find that kind of interesting as he turns it from that
So I've never
becoming
read,
followed by movement and then rest.
Yeah, I've never read Maximus. I've never read Maximus for Maximus' sake to see what he says in his own words. I've studied it specifically in terms of what he and the Cappadocian fathers, Basil, and
Gregory.
Basil and the two Gregories, right?
Gregory,
Basil
yeah.
and the two Gregories, right?
The two Gregories, yeah.
What all four of those individuals, obviously Maximus was later, then Palamos was hundreds and hundreds of years later than all four of them. What they're essentially getting at, or where they're, the way that they would describe the undescribable, or the way that they would describe the nature of God, which they say is ineffable, and yet go on to describe much about it. The reason they would say it's ineffable is because it is unlimited. It is infinite, without boundary. No diminution allowed. And so going back to my initial...
If there's a classical book on that by Yaroslav Pelikan, I don't know if you've heard of it. Classical Christianity.
That I have read. I've read his one of his 5 history books.
I'm on the last chapter now. It's been a real slog to get through. It's like what does Yaroslav Pelikan say about Gnosticism in his first book? He says two things. One, he says that it is the original Christian heresy, and two, he says it is an organic Christian movement. An organic Jewish movement. That it wasn't an inherited byproduct of the schools of Alexandria. If you're kind of if you're looking into like the roots of that, have you read what's his name? Alan F. Segal's Two Powers in Heaven?
No, I'd actually like to.
I would read that because he goes right into this discussion of this term, and it just seems really difficult to trace it. But it certainly seems to have been being applied. Not the term Gnostic, but eventually that term, as it would cover these. This term seems to be referencing many things, including but not exclusive to Christians. It's
yeah. Well, and another thing I would say is I think that exactly what you just said about it wasn't known as Gnosticism, but became known as Gnosticism. I believe it's the reason why the Gospel of Thomas is even seen as a proto-Gnostic gospel. I think it was the first gospel, or one of the first gospels written, and I think it was the not proto-Gnostic. I think it epitomizes Gnosticism, but that the derivations and the creations and the things added onto it are seen in the 2nd century with Sethiism and Valentinianism and these other.
It sounds to me like you should read this book by Alan F. Segal, Two Powers, because he really goes, because that there's a term that will be used to apply to those people, but he'll look at like how that term's being applied, and is it safe to say that whenever the term's being used that they're actually speaking about the Gnostics, or maybe they're speaking about the Christians, because it seems that the term is also maybe even also speaking about some group in Judaism as well. And so it's just really interesting. Like,
hey, do me a favor if you would you email me and just the title of that book? I'm walking right now, and
it's Alan F. Segal, Two Powers in.
Yeah. Just DM me, but I so appreciate that. I will look into that. But going full circle but going full circle back to GV's original question of why not just choose Catholicism, is that two things. I don't think it's universal enough. But with that being said, I don't think it's too harsh. I think it's not harsh enough. And what I mean by this is that given that God is that which can never be less than. And if you look up jurisprudence, if you look up the concept of what constitutes a crime, diminution or loss is necessitated within. right? Let's say I curse God. Well, he didn't actually get his feelings hurt. Or let's say I lie to somebody about God. Well, that wasn't true, and it didn't actually affect God, but it did affect the individual. So that crime is not an infinite crime against an infinite creator, but rather a finite crime against a finite being, right? And so that when I say I think that Catholicism doesn't go far enough in terms of its ideals of hell, I think I think for one, Pope Francis has made an argument that maybe hell is a little less real than we think. Secondly, I don't mind the doctrine of purgatory, maybe less of a waiting and more of a temporal punishment. But here's what I believe: I believe that the crimes of Hitler against the Jews was not a crime against God, but was rather a crime against 6 million plus Jews, and that the proper hell for that, to basically balance it out, same way that a criminal sentence would be meant to not restore society, but to make amends with society, to get yourself right with society, would simply be to equal out the pain caused. So, in one sense, I don't think they're universal enough, and then in another sense, as far as their view of hell and how that plays out, I don't think they're harsh enough. Case in point, I think that the reason why Catholic priests were moved after cases were brought against them, and I know how horrible that is, and I'm not trying to do a low blow here, but what I think many times the motivation was, I don't think it was just a good old boys club. Sometimes that was true, but I think what it was the sense of, well, they're still in the priesthood. The blood of Christ can forgive anything. They're still a brother, and so let's show mercy and grace as Christ would, and consider them whatever. And so what I think is in those cases, they could still be in the priesthood or have been in the priesthood when the crime was committed, but they will serve or experience every ounce of pain that they inflicted. But that I don't believe in the ultimate analysis that they're separated from God eternally. And so, yeah, if you kind of understand what I'm saying there about not harsh enough on hell, but too harsh but not enough universal, not enough. It's not universal enough, but it's also not punitive enough. If that makes sense. And I think that only derives from where we originally begin, which is this presupposition of the inherent the inherent separation or unity of God and man at the beginning of our theological and philosophical explorations.
I think GB's dead. I think you killed him, bro. I think you killed GB.
I'm dead. I've been listening this whole time. What's up, y'all? Yeah. Yep. Oh, are we circling back to the final?
Yeah. I would assume we're circling back, but we can go. This conversation can go wherever you guys would like. As long as there's engagement, I'll stay engaged.
Yeah, same. I was enjoying it. I thought it was really. Yes. By the way, I've heard that book, The Two Lords or whatever. I need to check that out myself. Okay, so
Yeah, I mean, I don't like one of the reasons like iffy with Catholics when they see like the Trinity as like an accretion or a development. You know, I think Alan F. Segal, I think Benjamin Soma. I think there's a lot of people who've done a lot of good work to show that the strict Unitarian view that people suppose, you know, the iconoclastic view that people suppose of Judaism is just not the case. I mean, it's just
okay. So let me
very silly and sort of immature, and I think it just comes out of this view that, like, perhaps the religions were a sort of synthesis of each other, right, resulting in, you know, something like the Hegelian view, right? Like, it's like, my goodness, look at this monotheism. My good, look at this polytheism. What am I to do? I guess I'll just combine them.
Well, hey, Bully, let me ask you a question about that. So, Um, okay, if you kind of dive into the Nicene Fathers and the Nicene Creed, and specifically the usage of homoousios, and what and how they understood that to be, or what they understood that to be, would very much bode to a Unitarian worldview, something similar to modalism or Sabellianism. Because here's why I say that is because one of the first heresies in the second, third or fourth centuries. One of the first heresies that they dealt with in the third century was the Sabellian heresy, modalism, right? And that they made.
Yeah, isn't the Sabellian heresy like kind of maybe a kind of subordinationism?
Yeah. Well, no. Actually, I think subordinationism would be more commensurate with Arianism. I think
all these bloody isms.
Right. Sabellianism, though, what it essentially said is that a person they reverse the who and the what. So they would say that nature is the who, but that the three persons of the Godhead are what. So. So
do you know what? That's interesting. I'm glad you've raised that because I'm speaking with an Australian at the moment. He seems to have a view that sounds like that. So perhaps I should be more aware of like the issues with Sabellianism. Perhaps I might be able to approach him better.
So that is actually not only my view. So ironically enough, I think that the Trinitarian worldview, or the Trinitarian doctrine that I believe developed from the Universal Church, Catholicism before the split or before the schism, right, was actually a result of not wanting to land on either side of either on one end Sabellianism or on the other end.
Well, I think if you read that Yaroslav Pelikan, he kind of has this kind of in clarifying things the way they did, they avoided like the heresy of the rabbis at the time, which was this kind of strict monotheism, and also avoided like the anarchy and craziness of polytheism.
Well, sure, but so the reason why they did that against Judaism, though, I don't want to say against Judaism, but the reason why they took an opposite approach to the monotheism of Judaism was because they didn't want to diminish the status of Christ. They didn't want to make him. They didn't want to be adoptionists because they didn't want to have this belief that man can ascend to godhood, or that Jesus Christ was
almost like the Protestant view of the covenant of works, right? That by completing the law, this Jesus of Nazareth kind of ascends to godhood. But yeah.
So they were stuck with an issue. They couldn't be like the Jews, because the difference between the monotheism of Judaism at that time and what they believed had to be true of Christ had to be true, or else they're simply a version of Judaism.
That's why I would read this Alan F. Kael and people like Benjamin Soma, because some of the weirdness is if you start looking at the arguments that the Jews make in like things like the Talmud or the Midrash or even earlier writing, Paul is using all those same arguments to argue for the Trinity. So it's like there's this term monotheism as it develops. I mean, if you do a search, I think there's an app where you can kind of do a search of the Greek words and things as they've sort of, there's these huge apps you can get now where all the Greek works have been translated and kept and put up, and you can search for this term monotheism. And I mean, one of the interesting things I found out a good while back now was that this term just doesn't appear anywhere until the 16th century.
No, I would agree. I would agree with you there.
So like what they're arguing for, like monotheism, if you want to define it as that, is not the strict Unitarian kind of bare bones, maybe like Islamic sort of monotheism.
See, I believe that without Sabellianism, that the Trinity reduces to polytheism in this way. I know that's a contentious view, but I think it reduces to polytheism in this way because what your what's your
That's all right. I can hear some beeping in the background. I assume you
right.
work for NASA or something. You're at the space station right now.
Yeah, no, Elon just left. Actually, yeah,
Yeah, that was
I'm at space. Yeah, I'm at SpaceX. Yeah,
I heard the doors going.
yeah, that's right. About to lift off. But no, I believe that without a modalist perspective on the Trinity, that the Trinity does reduce to polytheism, and I believe so in this way that that the three proper Christian denominations, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Eastern Orthodox, would openly say that in the Godhead there is one what, so that's the Shema, as they argue. There's the unity, there's the oneness, one what. What is it? It is God. But that
Dude,
there's
I love
three.
the
But there's
Shema.
but there's yeah. But that there's three who's. Three who's.
Uh-huh.
The,
I know a little bit about the Shema.
No, I actually would agree with you as it comes to Catholicism and Protestantism. You're left with the who is God problem isn't resolved, right? You're still left with three who's. I would actually agree with that. I would say Orthodoxy takes like a very strong view on like the monarchy of the Father, and so that the who question would be answered by the Father.
Yeah, but then I think that's more commensurate with adoptionism. They're just not saying it. So here's what I'll say: if there's no distinction ontologically between the begotter and the begotten, then begottenness.
I didn't say that there wasn't.
No. But at the ultimate analysis, if the Father and the Son,
to be honest,
are
I'll tell you what. I'll mute for a minute, right? I'm going to make a coffee and kind of listen. If you want to kind of lay it, I guess like lay it out as best you can, sort of thing. Because I feel like I'm probably stunting you at being able to like actually get out like a clear thing that you want to say. So yeah, I'm just going to listen for a minute while I make a coffee and that, and yeah. Sorry.
So unless anybody has an objection, I'm going to kind of move to Eastern Orthodoxy for a little bit. I've studied it for some time.
No, but if you could, like, just out of, if you could, like, so be as broad as you could, I think, because that would be interesting.
Yeah, so Eastern Orthodoxy has this notion of the Ordo Theologiae. It's this order of theology that not only applies to the economies of God, but also the ontology of God. In that you have God the Father, and that's where you begin your Trinitarian doctrine. You begin with God the Father as the monarchia, the Godhead, and that God begot a Son, Jesus Christ, and that from the Father spirates the Spirit. But that but what that essentially means is that there has to either be a diminution in status between the Father and the Son and the Father and the Spirit, or those words have no meaning. What does begottenness mean if they've both always existed from eternity past? And I've actually seen specifically Jay Dyer, who's a famous Eastern Orthodox apologist, actually concede this point in getting basically his response to these notions of temporal notions. When you're speaking of the ontology of the Godhead, is he basically goes, okay, yes, but the reason why that's so, the reason why we can't reconcile it, is because the limitation of human language or human comprehension. But from my point of view, if you take a Eastern Orthodox view on the triune Godhead, where you start with God the Father as the monarchia, the Godhead, the progenitor of the Son, and he's the begetter and the Son is the begotten, but they've always both existed, then what does begottenness mean? And if it's not a diminution in status and it's not a temporal distinction, what does begottenness mean? Because because the Eastern Orthodox will not take the stance that the monarchy of the Father is simply an economic truth or an explication of the economies of God, but rather they will say very distinctly it has to apply. It has to apply to to the ontology of the Godhead. And so though I would agree with what you said about Protestantism and Catholicism having that issue, I would say that the Order of Theologiae, the monarchy, the generation or the relationship between the three persons of the Godhead in the Eastern Orthodox conception
My bad. I literally died, so I lost you at the point where you said J, and then I kind of cut out. So sorry about that.
No, I said that Jay Dyer actually has this. Whenever I've seen him run into this argument twice from Catholics, actually, where they point out that if begotter and begotten is not a temporal distinction, and it's not a distinction in status, then there is no meaning to the term begotten.
Yeah, it's the personal hypostatic property of the person.
But that would make it solely about the economies of God, but not. I'm sorry.
In what's it like? And I really shouldn't interrupt because, like I said, I just missed like 5 minutes. My stupid pad died, so I shouldn't even really chip in. But
well, here, so long story short, here's what I'd say is what you and me agreed upon about Catholicism and Protestantism means that they have to be modalist, or what they're saying doesn't make sense. And I would say on the other side of the spectrum, what the Eastern Orthodox believe would have to make them be Arians or adoptionists, or what they say doesn't make sense. And both of those heresies were the heresy right before the Council of Nicaea, which was modalism, and the heresy dealt with at Nicaea, which was Arianism. And that the only way to not go to one side or the other, which were trade-offs that they couldn't reconcile or didn't want to make, that they contrived or made up this third option, which even intelligent Christians have difficulty explaining, and even the most learned Eastern Orthodox with the best triune doctrine I've seen ultimately have to acknowledge that it's the reason why it doesn't make sense is because of the limitation of human language and our limited comprehension.
Yeah, I'd be willing to concede. I think at some point this is going to break down, right? Because it's kind of an analogy. So,
yeah.
Point, but I'm struggling to see how it becomes Arianism.
Because if there's no difference in status between the Father and the Son ontologically or in the essence, then that word has no meaning. The only meaning it points to is one of status or time. But the Son is equal to the Father, other than in the economic realities that we see play out. Yeah. So ontologically, they're the exact same. So a begottenness only refers to the economies of God, not to the ontology of God, which is not what the Eastern Orthodox believe.
Yeah, so he's eternally begotten for us.
But again, if there's no temporal distinction between begotter and begotten, or no distinction between ontological status between begotter and begotten, then begottenness has no meaning. It is just a word that once pushed hard enough on, even one of the best apologists I've heard.
Isn't that assuming that there's no distinction between, like, there's something going on here? There seems to be like a collapse on your, like, the way you're putting it. And I'm like trying to pick it out.
Explain that.
Like, it just sounds like, so you're sort of saying either you go this way or you go the other way. And if you go this other way, it means that when you say these terms, begotten and unbegotten, right? Like the Father's not begotten, right? That when you apply them, that it only works to apply it to God in economy of creation, right? Like God in as he's experienced by us, but that they don't apply beyond that.
That they couldn't apply ontologically, or the son would not be of this of the exact same status as the father.
And when you say status, do you mean
It
like
wouldn't,
nature?
it wouldn't be a triune Godhead. It'd be the Godhead in triune expression. Without that, the Arian status between, and I'm using Arian or adoptionism in the loosest sense. I'm using it in the sense of there is a father and there is a son of a lesser status, whatever that lesser or whatever that differentiation in status is.
But why is he a lesser status?
To be born of the father is to be less than the father, because the father is what produced you. Like in a time sense, that definitely makes sense, right? My father is older than me, so in a temporal sense, right. So begottenness, if it doesn't have a temporal sense, then we can always say that the father is greater than the son. And that's
the mode in which God, like, it's like, sorry, I keep interrupting, but like the mode in which the persons exist, right? Like,
it exists ontologically or economically.
In terms of the inner Trinitarian life,
which would be ontology, which would mean they couldn't have a distinction.
Why can't there be distinctions?
Because they all have the same what?
Sorry, I'm not understanding. But like, why can't there be distinct? Is that like, as far as I'm concerned,
actually think of it this way:
is a distinction going to entail something on you?
Yeah, the fact that it's not a triune Godhead.
It's going to be like compositional division or something.
Yep, I would actually say that that's very, very much true.
We don't accept
I know. The energy essence distinction, that division does not imply distinction, is bullshit. Because anywhere where you have distinction, you have division. Anywhere you have division, you have distinction. The two are synonymous or synonyms. It's a bullshit fucking argument. I'm sorry, I don't mean that towards you, but I've heard this dumb argument my entire life that distinction does not entail division and vice versa, and that's absolute utter garbage and logically makes no sense. You literally destroy the possibility of knowledge, and you destroy intelligibility by making such a ludicrous assertion that distinction and division don't go hand in hand and don't necessitate one another. Think about that. Give me one example, because you're trying to say that in the Godhead it doesn't. The energy essence distinction is a distinction without a division, or that the nature person distinction is a distinction without a division. Okay, fine. I'll actually adhere to your worldview. And it's an impossibility to the contrary, or a reductio ad absurdum. If you can point to one thing in the natural order that has a distinction without a division, or has a division without a distinction. But without that, you want me to believe that the one exception is the thing that you're trying to say.
I think somewhere in this that you've assumed like a certain view of substance, right, and a certain view of identity.
From Saint Maximus, actually. So think of it this way: the Trinitarian order of the Godhead necessitates that personhood takes preeminence over essence or nature, correct?
Yeah, discussion.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if you go to Maximus the Confessor, what does he say about the nature of God? That it's infinite. That it's infinite, and that it's absolutely infinite, undefinable or undelimitable.
Undelimitable.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So, but what is Is that true of the person of the Son or the person of the Father? It's not, because the Father is not the Son and the Son is not the Father. And so, therefore, the fact that one isn't the other means that there is an inherent limitation between persons of the Godhead, but not the essence, according to St. Maximus. So, if you begin with the person as where you begin your theology as opposed to essence, such as with absolute divine simplicity, then you're stuck with the problem of saying, okay, the greatest thing about God is the person of God, which is finite by definition, because it is not the Son, it is not the Spirit, but yet the secondary thing is the essence of God, which is itself ineffable and unlimited. Let's just say unlimited.
Yeah, stop trying to use these 10-letter words.
Yeah. So
Like
that's what you're stuck saying, is that it's the finite person of the Father that is where you begin your theology, not the infinite nature of the triune God.
I think I would say that, like, we begin our theology, like, here with personhood.
Yeah,
But I would
that's
say
what I just said.
it's not. Yeah, sure. I understand. Like, maybe we just need to chill out a little bit. Like, I'm not trying to.
I wasn't the one cutting you off for the past 20 minutes. So you calm down and we'll keep going. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I wasn't cutting you off like to be like argumentative. I was just cutting you off.
What you were doing was exactly what you admitted to doing, which was not letting me get a point across and instead jumping.
It's just turning weird, proper fast. Like, I don't know what your attitude is. Like, I'm not trying to have an attitude with you.
Well, because you're not finishing a thought, and then you're cutting me off, and now you just said the most demeaning thing you could, which is trying to project onto me exactly what you're doing. And I don't appreciate it. And talk and take this conversation seriously, or we can go about it however you'd like.
I don't know, man. It's taking a turn for the worse.
Go ahead. Have an argument. Quit with the
No, I'm saying it's taking a turn for the worse. Like,
I'm sorry?
I said I think it's taken a turn for the worse, and I'm kind of baffled.
Yeah, well, that's a great cop-out. I'm willing to continue to engage as long as you quit with the perceptual games and actually engage intellectually with the arguments, as opposed to laugh and then project onto me what you're doing to escape the intellectual points I present.
Because I'm just baffled by
I know exactly. It's again, it's a perceptual play. And even now, you're willing to run away because you're claiming that it's devolved when I keep asking you to go forward with your argument. Intellect is what I care about. I don't care about what they believe. I don't care about what they believe. And I don't care about what you think is funny. I want to proceed with the argument. The argument is you begin your triune doctrine with an infinite person, and secondary to the three infinite persons of the Godhead is or the three finite persons of the Godhead is the infinite nature. So I'm telling you that any issue that you're running into now is because of that. Yes, you begin with substance, you begin with the hypostatic union, you begin with person, but that's exactly the issue. That's why you're running into the issue of having to put on the back burner what St. Maximus said about the nature of God. That he didn't say the Father was ineffable, didn't say the Father was limitlessness or unlimited or infinite. He said the essence was.
Yeah, and I think I would give you as an answer I would give to that. But like I said, like, you're just being really weird with me, man. Like, I just thought we were on good terms. I just thought we were having a good conversation, and I wasn't laughing like to be all like snarky or nothing. I was just like, well, I was kind of like blown away. I was just a bit like, oh, I thought we were having a good back and forth, and my interruptions were to like friendly, like to be like, oh, have you thought about it like this, or maybe you're missing this, right? It seems that you're interrupting me is to kind of be like, no, I'm gonna big dog this and finish this sentence.
No, exactly. I will finish the sentence. So that's exactly. No. Hold on. So go ahead. Once you're done, I'll respond. Go ahead.
Yeah. See, like, it's getting more and more formal, and I just thought we were kicking it. I don't know. I thought we were having a good time.
Yeah, but see, if we can kick it, as long as I can cut you off the way that you're cutting me off, and if you can cut me off to move from point to point,
yeah,
I can cut you off.
Just the way you did.
Wait, even just now. Yeah, exactly. Even just now.
But I'm not cutting you off like that. I'm not
you're cutting me off. You're cutting me off. I know, because you're not aggravated that I'm doing it to you, because I'm only doing it to you as a response to you doing it. You were scattering. You were going from point to point and cutting me off. I can't cut you off to finish a point. I can't cut you off to finish a point without me being argumentative and combative.
Well, you could. You have done like several times, and it's been fine. But it's starting to go that way, and I'm just saying, oh, this not up for that.
And there's only one of the two of us who've admitted to perpetually or continually cutting the other person off.
Well, I cut you off the last time I cut you off because my thing had died, and I'd asked you to explain something. And
no, that wasn't that. No, okay, yeah, but remember, I have this recorded. You stepped away. Having said, I keep cutting you off. I'm going to give you 5 minutes while I get coffee to let you explain it.
You're recording it. I see. So
okay. Again, you're avoiding the topic. The
topic's done. Topic's done.
No, the topic is not any of this. What it is about the nature.
I think whatever else.
Of the triune Godhead, and you're not engaging.
I got two books here.
Trying to come up with a reason. You're trying to come up with a reason not to continue the debate.
And I'm ready to speak more of it with you.
Exactly right. And now you're just going to keep trying to come up with an excuse of why you can't answer the very logical objections I've presented.
No, I just explained to you.
I know. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I've learned this with females. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm the jerk, and I'm in the wrong.
I know a guy you sound like. But,
I know a female you sound like, so at least I sound like
I got the books up with the passages in, and but we're not.
Yeah. Here's the truth: is that the only person who would agree with you in this chat room is someone who's biased towards your point of view, or someone who hasn't heard the entirety of the conversation.
Made a point as my point.
Yeah, exactly. That's
from the same book that you're quoting.
The problem. The problem is that you even heard what I said. Intellectually, as opposed to engaging intellectually, you keep trying to play these stupid games. Like, I'm going to walk away because now you're getting serious. Whatever, bro. Either engage or don't engage, but engage intellectually, and that's all I want. I don't care about the perceptual games. I don't care about what's funny. And if you're going to cut me off to move points, I'm going to cut you off to finish a point.
I'll just express it clearly for your recording, seeing your recording, right? Like, that while you're speaking, I had gone and grabbed the books that you quoted, right? I was interested to discuss it with you, bro, but like, you're just off the chain, and the reason for it, I think, is just
you are literally a pansy. You won't engage intellectually, and you keep dwelling on an issue,
or you're recording, or whatever it is. But you've taken this attitude, which I just feel like, well, I can't discuss this. There's no point us discussing.
No, you can't, because you won't. You can't. You're not. That's the issue. You could engage on the intellectual point, but you keep going away, talking about the shit that doesn't matter. Thank goodness. If either one of you all would like to talk, you guys have heard me interact. I'm not an asshole. I just like it fair. That's it. So if you guys would like to continue, great. If not, that's fine as well. What's up, Raymond? How you doing, brother? Cloud, would you like to talk about anything, brother?
Hello, if anyone's there.